Hello, and welcome back to Over the Next Hill Fitness Podcast. I'm Carla Coffey, your coach and host for today's program. This episode is sponsored by Coffee Crew Coaching, which is me. So if you are looking for a personal fitness trainer, a running coach, do a little bit of dabbling in nutrition, I can help you there. Hit me up. There's a button on the podcast. You can email me, carla@coffeecrewcoaching.com. And like I said, there's a button in the podcast that you can get me directly. But yeah, if you need a coach for any of those things, look me up and I'd be happy to give you a shot and see if I tolerate you. Just kidding. See if you tolerate me. It's also sponsored by Hydro Patch. There's a code in the show notes for 20% off. I think the advertisement says 10, but I badgered them to give us an extra 20, and I didn't want to redo the commercial. So, but get in there in the show notes and get that discount. There's some other discounts in there as well for Jam Bar and some other hydration products. So please do that. If you haven't rated the program yet, please do so. Go to whatever server you're on and give me 5 stars, please. You can drop a note there saying how terrible I am at what I do, but you enjoy the other people. That's totally fine. But whatever it takes, please give me 5 stars. Help me climb the charts. Leave a review. I appreciate that. There's a link to buy me a cup of coffee. As you'll notice in the podcast, I'm almost always sipping on a coffee. So, you can buy me a cup and get a shout out with your name on the podcast. You also can be on the podcast. If you have a great story that you'd like others to hear, then by all means, hit me up and we'll get you on the podcast. So today we're going to hear a story by Mark Black. You guys, you have no excuses to not get off the couch. Once you hear this story, you are going to be motivated to do just that. So please listen in, and I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the show, Mark. It's great to have you here.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, let's start at the beginning. Tell us about Mark and the running journey and how you got started running and all that's in between.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I actually was a cross-country runner when I was like a middle school kid. So I'd been running. My parents are both phys ed teachers. So being active and was a part of our childhood and something I had kind of always done. But I was born with a congenital heart defect. And so by the time I was about 14 or 15, doctors said that running, well, being athletic in general, but certainly running was dangerous. So I had to take a long pause from that. But when I was 24, I was fortunate to receive a heart-lung transplant. Very dangerous surgery, but it was the only thing that was going to keep me living. So underwent that surgery, and about 3 months, maybe more like 6 months after the surgery, started to run again. And ultimately, that led me to running some marathons and half marathons and rediscovering my joy of running.
Wow. So what was it like between 14 and 24 of the I'm not allowed to run and now I'm running again? What was your mindset that gave you the courage to start running after that surgery?
Yeah, so that period of time was really challenging because as a 13, 14-year-old kid, you're discovering who you are and deciding lots of things about your identity anyway. And my identity up until that point was very closely linked to being an athlete. And so when that was taken away, I wasn't really sure who I was anymore, and where I fit. And so I took some time to discover that, I guess, or figure that out. And I ended up going into theater and doing some other things because that's what I was able to do at the time. And then went through the very challenging journey of waiting for and receiving a transplant. That was about a 1.5 year long process. And after that, I asked the doctors what my kind of limitations were. And they said, essentially, we don't recommend that you go deep sea diving or skydiving because of the potential negative impact on your lungs from the air pressure changes.
Hmm.
Other than that, do what your body will let you do. Kind of listen to your body and do whatever you want to do. And so I thought to myself, well, if I could run a marathon, that would kind of mean I could do anything I set my mind to. Like, to me, that was the horizon of the ultimate athletic achievement. Even though I know people run ultras and do longer than that, I'd never run longer than 10K. When I decided I wanted to try and do that, and when I first started training, I'd also, I hadn't run in 15 years. I hadn't even walked on my own in about 4 or 5 days because I'd endured this transplant surgery. So it was a big goal. But yeah, I began in the rehab center in the hospital doing 1 minute of walking, 1 minute of jogging kind of thing. And it took me about 2.5 years to get to the finish line of the first marathon.
Wow. That was going to be my next question, is how long was that training period? But
Yeah, it took me about 8 or 9 months to be able to do kind of like a 5 to 7K without feeling like it was really taxing. I ran my first half marathon a year and a half after the transplant, and then went on from there to do the marathon training after that.
okay. Wow. That is so inspiring because, some of us want it yesterday, right? And we want to have that success, like I said yesterday, and yet you kept at that goal for 2 years. That's amazing. That in itself is, I mean, the transplant obviously is a big deal, but the fact that you stuck with a goal that you had in your mind for 2 years is just incredible. What kept you
Well,
going?
uh, yeah, thank you. I mean, that's a marathon mindset in general, right? I mean, you I use that metaphor of running a marathon for lots of things because the lessons you learn in training for and running a marathon are so transferable to many other life goals, right? I mean, you start at that start line with all the excitement in the world, and then you get to mile 20 and question everything, or at least I do.
Yeah.
And then you have to figure out what's going to get you the last 6 miles or whatever. Um, so yeah, what kept me going? Lots of different tips and tricks. I mean, I think I relied heavily on habit and on routine and on just executing the next run as opposed to trying to, again, be impatient and try and get to the finish line too quickly. And I also I kind of always in my mind was remembering what it was like to not be able to run.
Mm.
Right. And so I would tell myself repeatedly, I get to run, I get to run, I get to run. Like, there was instead of I have to run, right? Because I think that's when you're doing the training, there are runs you don't feel like doing. There's days when you don't feel like going out and doing your practice, and reminding myself that it was a privilege to be healthy enough to get to do this was really helpful.
Yeah. So, what year was that first marathon? Do you remember?
2005.
Okay. So,
Yeah,
almost 20 years ago now.
yeah, yeah.
And how many have you run since then?
So I did 4 of them all together, and basically 1 year after another. Each time I finished one, I would say to myself, "Oh, I'll just maintain. I'll just maintain. Like, I've done all this work to get to this point." And invariably, uh, the schedule wouldn't be such that, oh no, I kind of need a break right now, and so I'd continue to run, but not more than kind of 10K. And so then I'd have to kind of re-up the training all over again. So I did 4 in 4 years, and the plan was to run 5 before I turned 30, and I was on pace for that. And then our second of 3 children was born, and I vividly remember going out for a long run on a Sunday morning, and we had a 3-year-old running around, and my wife was holding this newborn, and I'm waving goodbye, saying, "I'm going to go run for 4 hours." And then, we both know that when I get back, I'm going to be pretty useless for the rest of the day, right? And I thought, she didn't say a thing. But in my head, I thought, this is not really fair to her. We'd trained for half marathons together. We'd run a long time, and then when she had her child, obviously she was taking a break, and I just thought, yeah, this seems kind of more like a selfish pursuit than a healthy pursuit at this point. And so that was my cue to make that the last run for a while.
Okay. I was just thinking, since we are at the new year now, and how many people probably made New Year's resolutions, and maybe by the time this airs, they may have already dropped them, and yet you pursued your resolution, right, for 2 years.
Mhm.
And then, as you said, you wanted to keep that mileage up, but it would fall down, but then you'd build it back up again. There's so much tenacity in that. So that's just so wonderful to hear. You don't, not everybody has that, even if they have run a marathon. They don't all have that kind of tenacity. So congrats.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's, again, it comes back to habit and um and daily execution, right? And getting back on the metaphorical horse when you fall off. I think, a lot of us, we have grand aspirations, and whether it's a training program or it's getting in shape at the beginning of the year or it's going on a diet or whatever it is, and as soon as we trip up, which we inevitably will because we're human, um, we are so hard on ourselves that we just give up entirely instead of saying, well, geez, that was a slip, but I can still, you know not all is lost here, right? I'm still making progress. Many times I would talk myself into a run I had to do by just saying, I'm going to go out for 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I give myself permission after 10 minutes, if I still don't feel like running, to turn around and come home. And invariably I wouldn't, because the hardest part was the getting the sneakers on and just starting. And once that was done and I was out there, it wasn't so bad, right? And so, often I think just giving ourselves the permission to do whatever we can that day, uh, and knowing that that's still better than doing nothing, is a really helpful tool. I used to say to myself all the time, even if today is slow, even if it's, I don't go as far as I planned, I'm I'm that much further ahead than I would have been if I had stayed on the couch.
Absolutely. That is so true. Yeah, I sometimes do that. Most of the time, I'm really anxious to get out the door, but I have done that and said, okay, after a mile, if you don't feel like, going, then turn around and go home. And I have only literally walked home one time. I
Mm-hmm.
ran out a mile, and I'm like, you know what? I'm walking back home. And it was more mental than physical. Obviously, it usually is. Um, but I think all of us giving ourselves that out is so important.
Right, and sometimes it's a legitimate, whether our body is tired or whether we're, recovering from an injury. I know sometimes runners can be I was one of them, be very stubborn about a nagging injury, and rather than taking 2 or 3 days off to let it heal, we run through it and make it worse. And when I struggled with a IT band issue during one of my training programs, and a physiotherapist finally had to be really stern with me and just say, look, you either find another way to get some aerobic exercise and give your leg a break from running, or you're not going to get to race day. It's just, you're going to not be able to move at all. And so I had to, face the fact that toughing it out was not the best strategy for that particular injury.
Yeah, yeah, and it's always a learning thing, whether it's learning about injuries, learning about fueling. Did you have a coach? How did you learn, like, what fuel, when to fuel?
Yeah, I followed the running room training program. So um, we have a local store. They run a clinic. They run multiple clinics, actually. One, they start with Learn to Run, which is basically like a 5K clinic, and they go 10 and half and full. And I would train with those clinics for each of my events for a couple of reasons. One, there was some great information, so that we would do like an in-class session and then go for a run afterwards. So that the learning in terms of nutrition and all of those things was really helpful. But they also provided a kind of a really solid training program that had been used by thousands of people. So I kind of felt really good that it would work for the average runner, not an elite athlete for sure, and it did. So, yeah, that's where I learned mostly about uh, about nutrition and about stress and rest. So they also followed a 10-in-1 program, which many people are familiar with. But if you're not, it basically means you run for 10 minutes, you walk for a minute, and you repeat that cycle in your training over and over and over again, and then even in the event. And I remember learning about that and thinking it was kind of, I don't know, wimpy or something. Like you're supposed to just keep running all the time. And then by trying it, I realized, oh, I could actually average a faster pace by doing this than by just running all the time. So it was things like that that I learned along the way that were really, really helpful.
Yep, that's so true. I know a lot of people have that in their mind that I have to run. And when I started doing the run walk, um, I'm able to maintain paces that I used to maintain as long as I'm not injured. Um, Last June, was it last year or the year before? I can't remember, but I did 4 marathons in a week, in 5 days, really,
Wow.
with a break in between. So it was 2, took a day, and then 2 because I'm doing all 50 states,
Wow.
and they progressively got faster. So the 4th marathon I did in exactly 4 hours and like 009 seconds
Wow.
or
Amazing.
something. So, and I haven't run a 4-hour marathon in a while, but it's all because I still do that walk. Mine are 30 seconds, so I run 3
Yep.
minutes and walk 30 seconds. And I did a marathon, I think it's been 2 weeks ago now. And I'm still a little bit injured, but it's never going to get any better, so I just go for it. But at the 20-mile mark, I was passing people like crazy because my legs were still fairly fresh, right? Because I'm still
Right.
taking that break. So it
Yep.
works. A lot of people don't want to, admit it. But unless you're an elite, just get on the walk bandwagon. Or
Yeah.
unless you're in your 30s or younger, then,
Right. 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 Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So
Well, and
the walk helps me.
it's also a great mental tool, right? Because when you start to get to the point where you're struggling, at least for me, I could also say, okay, run for 8 more minutes and you can get a walk break, right? 6 more minutes, you can get a walk break.
Yep.
And that was that, like, right? Because when
Yep.
there's still an hour to go, sometimes we need those mental breaks along the way too.
Yeah, for sure. Because I always look at it as I get to walk. I don't have to walk.
Right.
Where when you're tired at mile 20, you're like, I just have to walk. I can't run. And it's like, no, I get to walk, but then I'm going to run again.
Right.
So yeah,
I earn my walk by doing these
yeah,
10 minutes of running first. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So now, are you still doing marathons? When was your last race?
No, I haven't done one since 2010, 2011.
Okay.
And it's funny, I had intentions of returning, and I still do, to returning to long distance running at some point. But it was only after I stopped when our second son was born, and then we had a third one after that. Um, that I kind of realized, oh, you know what? Everybody that I run with is either kind of under 30 or over 50, and I now understand why. And there's certainly exceptions to that, but um, for everybody in my long distance training programs were always in that age bracket. I was one of the anomalies, and with 3 kids, we have 2 teenagers and one who's 8, and they're all in hockey and soccer and basketball and working, and so we're taxi driving all the time. So it's really a time management thing more than anything else for me now. So I get to the gym for 45 minutes or an hour and try and get my sweat in, and that's about all the schedule allows for right now.
Yeah, I totally understand that. So during your marathons, did you run them all like the same state? Did you run the same one several years in a row? How did that turn out?
Yeah, so I'm in Canada. So I ran one in Nova Scotia. Then I ran the national capital, which is in Ottawa. I did that one twice. And my last one I actually did in North Carolina. In it's called the Beach to Battleship, and I did it as part of an Ironman relay.
Oh,
So I did the marathon leg of the Ironman with 2 other heart transplant recipients, actually. So it was really cool. We met online, didn't know them like we knew each other for one day before we did the event together. But it was a very neat and very different experience from the other two because and when you think about it, all the marathons I'd ever done and half marathons start at 7 or 8 in the morning, and so you program your whole race plan from nutrition to clothing to etc. based on a pattern where the day is going to get warmer, right? Typically speaking, um, and you're going to have X hours after waking up. I'm going to eat, and that's going to be X amount of time before I run, and all of that was completely thrown off because the race started at 7 a.m., but I wasn't going to start running until 3 or 4 in the afternoon.
Right.
And so it actually, first of all, I'm going to lay around all day and not tire myself out like doing too much. I've got to plan when that meal is because it's not going to be breakfast. And it's going to get colder as I run because the sun's going to start going down as opposed to getting warmer. So it was a whole different, and there's the added pressure that I felt of like, now if I don't finish this thing, it's not just my goal.
Yeah.
These other two people who have done their leg don't get to quote unquote finish the race if I don't get there. So I was a lot more conservative in my pace. I ran a lot slower to make sure I got there. But it was a really interesting experience.
Wow. And you said the other two participants had heart transplants too?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, we call ourselves the Tin Men.
How did you find two more people that's incredible.
It was a transplant Facebook group, like a Facebook group of people who have had transplants. And we talk about all kinds of things, medications and all kinds of stuff. But somebody had posted in the group, one of these guys had posted, "Hey, we're doing this Ironman. We're looking for another heart transplant recipient to run this Ironman with us. We need a runner. We've got a swimmer and a cyclist." And I kind of went, I could probably do that. And so we chatted a couple of times, and I found out where the race was. One guy was from California. I think the other guy was from North Carolina. So he was the one that knew about this particular event. So it was really neat.
Wow, that's just crazy. So I've heard of relays for Ironman, well, for tries, but not at the Ironman distance. So I've participated in the run portion of like a 5K for a sprint try, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know that they had them all the way up.
Yeah,
It
was
Ironman.
super fun, and it's funny you were talking about passing people because of your walk run. That was the other neat thing about this. I'm slow. I run marathons in like 4:30 is my PB. But in this event, I was passing everybody because a lot of them were not running the relay; they were doing the whole Ironman. Right. And so we're out there like kilometer 5, and they're like, "Whoa, you look good." And I was like, "Yeah, because I've been out here for 25 minutes, and you guys have been out here for 8 hours already, right?" Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. In that marathon that I did, this person come just flying by me, and I looked at the person next to me. I said, "I hope they're in the relay portion," because there was a relay, and it's like, how are you having that much energy here? So yeah, they should have to wear something on their back that says relay.
Yeah, I'm just starting.
It's so disheartening watching these people fly by you. So yeah.
Yeah.
He was quite a bit younger than me, so that's okay too. But so with your races, is there a favorite that if you could do it every year with time and everything that you would keep going?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, I did the national capital race that I did twice. I did it twice for a reason. It's a pretty awesome event. It's, I don't know, 10,000 runners or something. So it's not massive, but it's big enough. And it's also the national championship for Canada. So the elite Canadian runners are all there, which and they do an out and back course, so you get to see them because they take off, and of course they take off, but you get to see them on the way back and watching. To your point, watching them kind of glide, right? It's just like they just don't even look like they're working, and of course they are, but they're just such amazing athletes. So it's pretty cool to be a part of that. And like most marathons, you also see people of all shapes and sizes, and people. We had some military guys that are running in their combat gear, and it's also very humbling experience to see some people who don't look like they should be able to move almost because of some disability or whatever it is, and they're sometimes passing me. So
Mhm. Yeah. At the marathon I did, it was out and back as well. And like you say, you get to see those faster runners, right, of both genders. And I saw first place, and she looked pretty good, but maybe struggling. So when second and third came by, then they were a little spaced apart. I said, "She's really struggling. Keep pushing," because it gives them hope, right?
you can catch her. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of my favorite things to do. Kind of egg them on. But, so what else have you been doing then for the past several years that you're not doing marathons?
Um, well, fitness wise, I went from one addiction to, or I call it one cult to another, and did CrossFit for about 4 years,
Okay.
which I adored. And then I got COVID twice
Yeah.
in a short span. And when I went back to CrossFit, I just couldn't. My heart rate would go like really high really quickly, and I wasn't tolerating it well. So I'm like just a kind of a regular good life gym goer right now. Lift some weights and jog a little bit, and that's doing the trick for now. And then, um, like I said, I have a super busy travel schedule with the speaking that I do, and writing a couple of books, and then it's just being dad and driving the minivan to hockey games and soccer practices and things like that. So
That makes sense since you live in Canada that your kids play hockey. I should have tied that together quicker. Uh,
yeah.
so tell us about your books. What type of books do you write, and what type of speaking do you do?
Yeah, so I've written two books. One called "Live Life from the Heart," and one called "The Resilience Roadmap," which is all about how we build internal resilience. Uh, and my speaking is what I do for a career. So I travel around North America and speak at corporate events and association conferences and things like that. I stumbled into it completely by accident 20 years ago. Was invited to a local event to speak about my transplant story. And then somebody tried to hire me to speak at their company, and I didn't really understand what they were doing or what they were asking. But I learned that this is something that you could do, and started to kind of learn about the professional speaking world. And now I do, 30 or 40 speaking events every year all over North America.
Wow.
So
Is it
that,
all heart related about your?
um, no, so the events that I do could be insurance professionals or teachers or engineers or anybody. The presentation that I do is really about resilience and mindset in general. So my story is kind of the backdrop to that, but the idea is, here's my story. What's your story? Um, there are lots of uh, skills that transfer, right? Because it's largely about mindset, discipline, goal setting, all of those things
Mhm.
that, as marathon runners, we know about, that apply to all sorts of different contexts, whether you're an athlete or not.
For sure. Yeah. We'll have to put the links to your books in the show notes. So if anyone wants to
Great.
get
Yeah, we
those,
can certainly do that.
yeah, they're available on Amazon, I assume.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. Yeah.
Everything is, right?
Yeah, exactly. When in doubt.
Yeah. 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 That's so encouraging to hear your story that, 2 years you endured training, really, to get to that where some people, oh, if I can't make it in 6 months, then it must not be for me. No.
Yeah, give yourself time and patience, and there's not a lot we can't do with enough time and patience.
Mhm.
Problem is, we don't. Those are in short supply, and in the age in which we live, right, where we're kind of programmed by phones and other things to want instant gratification.
Mhm. Did you have any setbacks along the way where you felt like giving up and you
Oh
had
yeah,
to really talk yourself back up?
yeah, oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, well, multiple times. I mean, the first training program, like, so I followed a 16-week program each time. That kind of took me from 10K to full marathon over the course of 16 weeks. And that first one, as the mileage gets really high, in kind of, I don't know, a month before the event, kind of, um, I'd just be exhausted. I'd just be tired all the time. You're still working and living a life, right? It's not like we're full-time athletes. So it was very tempting to just kind of say, let's, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. Um, and then again, in the event, so the first event was the worst one because I ran it essentially in a hurricane. I mean, I think that technically it was classified as a tropical storm, but just like ridiculous winds and pouring rain, and it was a hilly course to begin with.
Ugh.
So there were a dozen times during that first one where I just didn't want to run any. In fact, I didn't want to start. They postponed the race for 2 hours because
Oh,
the cones that marked the course had blown over, and they had to reroute the course because of a bridge closure, and like it was a mess. So yeah, there were many times in that first race that I wasn't sure I was going to make it.
yeah. And going up to that race, before, like during the 2 years of training, um, were there times in there that you asked yourself, because we always ask ourselves at the 20-mile mark, what was I thinking? But were there times then that you would think, what?
Yeah, there were. I mean, but I think it was for that first one. It was proving to myself that I could do it, and so I just wanted to prove. I wanted to prove a point to me, and kind of to the medical team too. I mean, they had said, we give you the blessing to try and do whatever you want, but at the same time, they had also said before I even got the transplant that once I had it, if everything went well, I could maybe hope to go back to work part time someday. And I always remember that meeting and that particular sentence and thinking, I didn't go through this transplant journey that was not easy so that I could go back to work part time. Like I want a little more out of life than that. And so the marathon to me was the symbolic representation of if I can do that, then, I'm going to live a full life.
Awesome. Yeah, sky's the limit at that point, right?
That's it, right? And the number of times I face a challenge today and I think to myself, oh, you ran a marathon. It's not that hard. It's not as hard as that.
Yeah, no kidding. Is there anything else about your journey, about your books, anything that you would like the listeners to remember and help them get through any struggles they might be having?
Oh, great question. So a couple things. I mean, um, well, first I'll say, please, if you haven't talked to your family about organ donation, please do that because I'm alive today because somebody did. So I always have to make that plug.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say what I learned in the first marathon that was reinforced in all the others is pursuing a goal. It's important to do that, and the reason it's important is not because of the goal itself, but who it helps you to become as you pursue that goal. So the decisions you need to make, the character you need to develop, the discipline you need to have to pursue that goal, that stays with you forever. And so it almost doesn't matter if you achieve the goal or not. Like if you executed the full training program for the marathon and then got injured at mile 20 and couldn't finish, that would not be fun. But you would still have benefited from all of the things that a finisher benefits from, which is the self-confidence that it gives you to know that I can put my mind to something and I can execute on a goal, that I can be disciplined and execute a plan. Like there's just so many things um, that again I still call on and rely on to this day, and that I try and pass on to my kids. And I don't know how well I'm doing that yet because they're not interested in running yet. But even in their pursuits, it's reminding them that why it's important to go to practice and why it's important to learn from your losses as well as your wins and all of those things that again I think are just good life lessons.
Yeah, for sure. They say there's a saying about the marathon, the race is just a victory lap. You putting in that work, that's what built that character,
Right.
right?
Right.
And that's kind of with your kids too, going to all those practices. Maybe they didn't win, but they built a lot of character to get to that game. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Right. And yeah, it's funny as parents, those of us who have been around athletics our whole life know that sometimes it's not that we wish the kids to lose, but we're almost glad when they lose a game here and there, because it's a teaching moment, right? And how they respond to that is really going to be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the hardest thing for all of us is that those losing moments,
Mm-hmm.
those are tough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, Mark. I really appreciate it. We'll put your show note or your book in the show notes, and maybe get a little business for your little selling of your books. And yeah, so we'll look forward to talking to you again, and maybe see you at a race sometime.
Yeah. Awesome. Nice to meet you, Carla. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye. All right. Well, thanks for listening to the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please continue to follow, share, and rate the program. If you're needing that coach, reach out to me. There's a button in the show notes that you can contact me directly. Share it with a friend if you think their story needs to be on the podcast. I'd love to hear from them. So thanks again and have a great day.